This week's Piltch Point with Avram Piltch is powered by a pure VPN. When you're browsing the internet, you want to keep yourself both secure and private, and the best way to do that is with a VPN like PureVPN. It obfuscates your browsing history from Google and Facebook, but also from your ISP, and it gives you the ability to report that you are physically somewhere that you are not, which is wonderful when you're traveling out of the country and you want to access a service that is not available. And right now, they are doing a deal for our viewers. You can get 2 years of service for $2.88 a month instead of the regular $10.95. And you can get all of that by going to piltchpoint.live/purevpn. All right. So we've been teasing it all show. You and your team have been doing some weird stuff, and I absolutely love it. What have you guys been up to? Uh-oh. You've gone quiet on me, Avram.
We did a couple of little science experiments in our office just to kind of prove that things we could do certain things. So the first one, actually, I think could be kind of useful to people to know about. So I met this writer, TJ Smith. He's a YouTuber. Anyway, he showed me how to waterproof electronics. So the key is that you have to take, a circuit board, let's say, and you have to bathe it in this very poisonous chemical called corrosion X, which you can buy. You don't want the aerosol can, you want the spray bottle, so that you can open it up and dump it into like a piece of Tupperware or a bowl or something, although one you'll never eat from again, and use it to bathe a board. Now, I wouldn't recommend, it's probably not a good idea to actually put your power source underwater or do this to it, but what we did, and what I can say we were able to do, is we took a Raspberry Pi 4, bathed it in Corrosion X, took the wires, the power USB-C cable that provides power, the micro HDMI cable that provides video. We dipped the tips of those into Corrosion X, and then we were able to run the Raspberry Pi underwater. So,
wow.
Supposedly Corrosion X will last for 6 months of constant use. Obviously, we didn't test that theory. The one problem that we had was that and this could have been a problem with just the USB-C cable we were using or whatever, but as we were pushing, the problem is that the Raspberry Pi was fairly light, so it wanted to float, and I wanted to get it completely submerged for purposes of science. So I had to keep using the wires to kind of push it underwater, and sometimes the power cable would not have a solid connection when I was pushing it. So that's probably just me pushing on it or whatever. Once I just let it float, it stayed on no problem. Now, there's a lot of caveats to this. One, Corrosion X is super poisonous. They tell you if you get it on your clothes to I don't know, be careful and put your clothes somewhere. Don't get it on your skin. Although the guy who showed us how to do this and wrote the article with me, he uses his bare hands to do it and just washes them a lot. But one thing to keep in mind is it never dries. It's like putting WD-40 in a lock or something.
Oh.
It's kind of a lubricant. So anytime you touch, once you've waterproofed something with Corrosion X, anytime you touch it, you'll get this chemical on yourself. So why would you want to do this? Theoretically, This would allow you to use something like a Raspberry Pi outside in poor weather, in bad weather, or I don't know, near a swimming pool or something. But here's the problem. First of all, you don't want to be in any water that this is touching because it's got this chemical on it that comes off. Um, Second of all, you're not waterproofing, and certainly would not be recommended to waterproof either, is the power source. So, you know, it still has to be plugged into an outlet or a battery somewhere, right? To get juice to actually do anything. Even if you don't have a monitor connected to your computer, to your Raspberry Pi, and you just want to give it power so it can like collect data from a sensor or something and send it to the internet. Um, it's you still need a power source,
Sure.
and you're not going to take an electric socket and start pouring water on that. Like that's really dangerous. Um, Even in this case, I would kind of caution people, um, not to touch the water when if they're trying this, not to wear gloves. I mean, granted, it shouldn't put any electricity in the water, because it shouldn't short. But you know, uh, really, it's more of a science experiment than anything else. So, I mean, really, and honestly, if you wanted to use a Raspberry Pi or another microcomputer outside, probably a better bet would be to get a waterproof case to put it in,
Yeah.
and then you could put the batteries in that case too. Um, and that would be probably a cleaner, neater solution that would probably protect it better because this is just coating against water, but not against, if hail hits it or something and damages it from the weight or anything like that. So, I mean, I guess one possible use case for this sort of thing would be if you were building, let's say, a robot or a radio controlled vehicle or something, and you had to put the circuit board in it, and even though the entire thing was supposed to be waterproof and you had a waterproof structure around it, maybe you want to add an extra layer of protection for the board inside, that you don't really touch, but just in case some water leaks in, you're covered. Um,
Like a, like a
I think
second
that's
level,
probably the
like a
best
second
use
level
case.
of protection on the board, not as the
Yes.
primary thing, but as a secondary.
Yes. Yes. So that, I mean,
Got it.
now, what TJ did with it and what one could do, but again, I think there are just better ways of doing this. He put it in a bucket of ice, um, to use it as a cooler, as to make it cool for overclocking. Um, and indeed, putting it in a bucket of ice makes your Raspberry Pi very cool. When it's normally running at idle in the like 50s or 60s Celsius, um, and then you put it in there and it's running at 11 degrees Celsius or even 8 degrees Celsius if not overclocked. Um, you know, that's impressive. On the other hand, the ice is going to melt eventually, so this is not a good solution.
And
And
certainly
by
not a
the way,
long-term
getting
solution.
a $5 or $10 fan will allow you to maybe not get that cool, but will get cool enough so that the machine doesn't throttle. And isn't that all you really care about? I mean, as long as it's under 80 degrees Celsius, which is the point at which it throttles, um, then you should be happy. Like, yeah, I mean, unless you're just trying to prove to somebody just how cool you can get it, you don't really need to care whether it's 75 degrees or 5 degrees, as long as it's below the threshold of throttling. So, um, we did it. It was a fun experiment. I encourage folks to check out the article and video on Tom's Hardware, um, about this. But for most people, this is going to be more interesting to know that it can be done than to actually find a use for doing it themselves and dealing with the toxic chemicals and the, you know, unnecessary stuff. Um, the other thing that we have done, which will be on our live on our site in a couple of days, we're waiting for the final cut of the video that we shot to be ready. Um, is we decided we would try uh, testing an AMD and an Intel system to see which one cooks pancakes the best on its CPU. So to generate now, if you look online, people have cooked eggs on CPUs before. It's not it's not a brand new concept that the amount of heat that a CPU can generate is so great that you could actually use it for cooking. But we hadn't seen anybody do pancakes. And what we really wanted to do, because we hadn't seen anybody else do it, is to pit AMD against Intel. Now, obviously, we didn't try every AMD processor and every Intel processor. We tried two comparable ones. So they were both high-end desktop chips because those get hotter. So we used the Intel Core i9 9980XE, which is a high-end desktop chip, and we used the Intel Threadripper, not the I mean the AMD Threadripper 2990WX. Um, and so I really encourage people to watch the video and read the article because there's a lot more detail in there, but I will give you a spoiler about what happened. So we were able to cook a pancake on the Intel chip. It took about 15 minutes to generate enough heat. Because these chips get up to a maximum of 105 degrees Celsius, which is 220 degrees Fahrenheit approximately. And that is enough to cook, but it's not like super hot like your stove. So by taking the fan off and putting thermal paste on the bottom of a small skillet, we were able to get it to get it to cook the pancake. I think our biggest problem was that our skillet was, even though it was really small, was too big for the mother to fit on top of the chip as much as we would have liked. So we had to kind of remove the VRMs, voltage regulator modules around the chip, and then that created some stability problems. Or we had to remove the cooling of the VRMs, I should say, not the VRMs. So we had to like hold a case fan, and to blow on them to keep it from getting so hot it turned itself off. Now, AMD, the Threadripper chip was actually a really large, physically large chip, so it's got a lot of surface area to put a pan on. But it also, even though it had full cooling on the VRMs, turned itself off. So, and we basically could not get it to run without a fan, without some type of active cooling solution on it. So that means we couldn't put our pan on it. That means, ergo, we couldn't really cook on it at all. Because there was some residual heat from when it was on and then turned itself off, we let it attempt to cook the pancake for a few minutes. With that residual heat, it didn't really work. It ended up with just being batter. So if you want to cook pancakes with a several $1,000 computer instead of actually using it as a computer, I definitely recommend Intel over AMD. Now, some AMD folks, fans, could argue that maybe it's better that it turned itself off than continue to run under the conditions where you're not really actively cooling it. Although the rebuttal to that would be, hey, the Intel chip didn't break and it managed to cook to manage that heat just fine. So, either way, it really doesn't tell you a lot about performance of those chips. So, and when you look at the actual performance of those chips, Intel wins on some scores and AMD wins on other tasks. So, they're really evenly matched. But when it comes to cooking, you definitely, at least in this high-end desktop class of processor, you definitely want Intel. So keep that in mind when you're on a desert island. If you're stuck on a desert island with a bottle of pancake batter, a high-end desktop, a working power socket, and nothing else, what you will do to survive, you will want the AMD chip.
Nope.
The Intel chip.
So close.
When you're stuck in the blue, I'm sorry. When you're stuck in the blue lagoon, you want a CPU from Team Blue.
There you go.
Uh,
I think
that's how to remember.
that's the quote there. I like that.
Yeah.
So how long did it take to prepare that second experiment?
So it took a lot of people. Our CPU editor Paul Alcorn, who is just absolutely brilliant with this kind of stuff, was visiting us from out of town because he doesn't live in New York, and he brought the stuff with him. And I think the setup for each was maybe half an hour to an hour. I think less. I think the first one took an hour, and then once we had it down pat, the second one took maybe like 20-30 minutes to get set up. Obviously also we ran IDA 64, which is a temperature measurement program, but it also has a stress test in it. So we wanted to make sure that not only were the computers on, but they were actually doing something that completely stressed out the CPU so as to generate as much heat as possible.
That makes sense. Yeah, I wouldn't have even thought about a stress tester, which of course is the logical thing. I know that I can push my processor to 100% rendering the show at the end of the night. But
I mean, we talked
yeah.
about. I'll be honest. We talked about adding another sort of layer to the testing where we would try different applications and see like which application cooks better for you. But we only had so many hours to do this, and it seemed like that's just adding a layer of complexity where, as it is what we learned is at the very peak stressor, it took 15 minutes. So I can only imagine if we were playing like a 4K game or something, and like, the game was getting really intense. We're in a big fight scene, so it started to heat up, and then there was a cut scene, and all of a sudden our pancakes, the pan started to cool down. So I guess if you're gonna cook, you need to have consistent heat.
Indeed. Unless you're making scrambled eggs, in which case on and off is best. But that's a whole different conversation. I think the takeaway.
Yes, we could try that.
I think the takeaway here is that during the show, right now, we could probably cook pancakes in the studio. This computer sits at about 100% most of the show. That's
the question is whether the CPU would let you, though, because it might,
as soon as you pop the fan off,
not be able to handle the heat.
Yeah, as soon as you pop the fan off, this thing will turn off.
Granted, for what it's worth, we had the equivalent of a heat sink in that the pan was a heat sink.
True.
Right, but we know that just having passive cooling a heat sink on a hot CPU is not a recipe for longevity for that CPU.
Very true. Well, I love the waterproofing. It's a great idea, and there are definitely applications for it. Not for most consumers, but like you said, there are definitely applications for it for things that are naturally going to get wet. Double protection, that kind of thing. But this pancake thing is the silliest thing I've ever heard, and I absolutely love it. I'm so glad that you guys did it.
Oh,
when will we get to see this video?
We're looking. When our video folks make a couple changes to the draft they showed us, so probably I'm gonna guess maybe Tuesday or Wednesday.
Perfect.
But yes, we'll have that up. We'll share it out. We certainly went, spent a lot of time on it, so we really want people to watch, especially watch the video, not just read the article. So we even got Tom's Hardware cooking aprons for this occasion. So.
Awesome. Well, Abram, I always appreciate the things that we talk about. We always talk about interesting stuff, but wow, cooking pancakes. on Intel or AMD better at cooking pancakes? That is the weirdest and one of my favorites, I think, ever. Thank you for that, and I I I challenge you to try and top it. How's that? We'll see.
We will try, especially if any story that involves comparing Intel and AMD always does well for us. So we're always looking for new vectors to compare them again, compare them on.
Well, that's definitely a new one. I can't wait to see the video.